Yesterday was media day at the Florida Panthers Ice Den in Coral Springs. 6 players had an opportunity to talk to the media and head coach Paul Maurice to discuss what happened in the past with this Florida Panthers team, all the trades and the roster turnover this summer, and they discuss the mindset heading into the 2022-2023 season. We are going to discuss some of their quotes and break them down here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Thursday, September 22nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers. Don't forget to also subscribe to Locked On NHL and Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden. Will they be covering all the preseason activities around the National Hockey League? So, Cats fans, what a day it was to experience Media Day and really to provide you guys all the sounds and all the quotes from all the players that spoke to the media yesterday, and really to really discuss their excitement heading into the season. Of course, we've been talking about really all summer about the finish, what's to come next, what do we think about these changes that the Florida Panthers went through, and now it's time to shut up and put the work in for these players and the coaching staff as well. And of course, these players got an opportunity really to really hang around each other and kind of get to know each other as well. And you know, it seems like a different type of energy, especially, we spoke about it with Jacob Winans yesterday about how this is a team that's been on the longest streak of making the postseason in its franchise's history. So it's a little bit of a different feel. The fan base is pumped up as well. Of course, a little bit of changes, but growing pains happen when it comes to when you're trying to build a contender. And really great to be back at the Ice Den as well in Coral Springs. It was really cool just going upstairs and seeing some of the guys again. Alex from Five Reasons Sports, Kobe Guy, and George Richards from Florida Hockey Now, David Dwork, Jameson Olive, all those guys, just being around the guys again. And of course, it was pretty cool just walking around and seeing kind of like what the kind of the behind the scenes presentation is going to look like. Of course, I'm not allowed to share that with you guys just yet. You guys have to wait until it's actually time to drop the puck at FLA Live Arena to see what the Florida Panthers are doing as far as like promotional nights as well. But I can say this because, of course, some of the players did come out to the media with their jerseys on. There is not a jersey sponsor for the Florida Panthers this season. A lot of players, a lot of teams have adjusted to getting sponsors on their jerseys. And I would have thought that the Florida Panthers would have maybe had a sponsor of like Funky Buddha or something, or Publix, but doesn't seem like that the Florida Panthers are going to have a jersey sponsor at least this season. And if they have, then they haven't really revealed it just yet. So really cool to be still around the area for media day. So like we spoke about, let's get right into it. So 6 players and head coach Paul Maurice had an opportunity to really talk to the media and really discuss what their offseason was like. Some of the guys coming in were talking to the media were some newcomers. Some of them were the guys talking about are guys who have been here for a while. And the first one to step up to the podium to talk was Aaron Ekblad, and talked about a lot about the changes and he felt that even though he didn't necessarily like it at the time, losing his friends Mackenzie Weegar and Jonathan Huberdeau, but talking about how this franchise and this team is so used to the changes that go on. I mean, let's not forget that this is a team that only has 3 remaining players from their Stanley Cup bubble in Toronto just in the 2020 season, Sergei Bobrovsky, Aaron Ekblad, and Aleksander Barkov, and the retooling, not rebuilding, that Bill Zito had to do in order to not only take this to take this team from mediocrity to a contender. Most times you would have to possibly tear it down and build it back up, but Bill Zito didn't do that. So Aaron Ekblad talked about how he's kind of used to change, that some if the front office feels like it's necessary, that he's gonna have some trust in them. And also talked about getting to know each other off the ice. They had a dinner away from the rink on Saturday night. Talked a little bit how they've had a lot of informal skates. That's been something we've been hearing a lot about, just getting on the ice, of course, with the collective bargaining agreement about when actually formal practices are happening. Hey, these players are allowed to get off the ice in a non NHL slash media setting, and it's really cool that these guys are already starting to kind of know each other's ticks, really, about what gets them going, whether it's on the rush, whether it's board battles, where they're going to be when it comes to a drop pass as well. So kind of cool that they're already starting that with informal skates, and that could possibly accelerate them once the regular season starts on October 13th. And Aaron Ekblad also talked about the offseason, about how it's better to actually be on the ice and skating instead of just being at the gym, because of course the hunger is there. That was a recurring theme during media day. Hunger. How hungry is this team? And of course, being bounced out after winning the President's Trophy, that is going to bring possibly a different level to this team. But also I realized that this is a possibility for this to be a little bit of a hangover as well. The possibilities out there, especially with the turnover. So let's also be aware that either one of those things can happen. And also asked about Gus Forsling being on the top pairing, and Aaron Ekblad spoke about he loves his foot speed and being one of the tops in the NHL, being on the same pair with them as well. So and also didn't really, as far as like posting about the hashtag time to hunt, didn't think that the Florida Panthers were bringing it back, but it seems like that they are going to bring it back via their social media team. Tim Reynolds of the Associated Press asked Aaron Ekblad about last season was the time to hunt, and that Aaron Ekblad was asked about, now that they won the President's Trophy, about being the hunted, and really discussed really about that the only expectations in that matters to them is really the expectations that they have in the room, which is a great mindset to have for the number one pair defenseman for the Florida Panthers. And really, before talking about getting to the playoffs, about the expectations, before I forgot who it was who asked this about uh, wh- asking a question about making the playoffs, and he says we expect to make the playoffs. But I had an opportunity to ask Aaron Ekblad about the fact that Uyghur is no longer with the organization with that trade. What of a great opportunity this is for someone like a Lucas Carlson, who signed another deal with the Florida Panthers, and bringing in a guy like Marc Staal into the mix, what kind of impact that they're going to have. So let's listen to this clip of Aaron Ekblad talking about the defensive pairs for the Florida Panthers this season.
Gonna be great. Obviously, to see Carl's game evolve is going to be huge. I've always been a fan of Stalzy. I think he's a great player. I like his gaps and stuff like that. I think being in Detroit, the way they press up on teams is kind of something that we're going to want to implement into our game, and I think he's going to do a great job showing us all the way in that aspect. So, yeah, really excited to get started with these guys. Obviously going to miss Weegsy, he's my boy, but at the end of the day, change, evolve, and get better as a team is our main focus.
And what I get out of that is that Aaron Ekblad, like you said, you can't change the past, but you can only look forward to what you have right in front of you and take it one day at a time. And then that's a good way to transition to someone like Sergei Bobrovsky. Spoke about the hunger, and that what kind of hunger is brought to this Florida Panthers team, and is it still there? And Sergei Bobrovsky talked about that this team hasn't really accomplished anything, and that the ultimate goal is not to win the President's Trophy, to win the Stanley Cup. So the motivation for them as a group is still there, and talks about his daily routine, we all know that Sergei Bobrovsky is someone who's always hitting the gym, always with his stretching. That of course your goalie, you have to be flexible in order to be well at the position, but takes it one day at a time. You can't talk about 20 the end of 2023. You got to just worry about training camp. Also, it's been a really tough summer for hockey players who are Russian as well, because of course all of the questions that are asked about them going back to their countries. Sergei Bobrovsky was asked a little bit about that, and Bobrovsky kind of dodged the question, but I don't blame him for dodging it. It's a really touchy subject when talking about the situation that's going on over there, and he did confirm that he did go back to St. Petersburg, Russia, where he's from, and of course talking about the direct flights getting over here. No problems with getting over here, and one thing that has been talked about over the summer about GMs advising players to not go back to Russia because they don't know if they have the opportunity to come back. And of course, we had a situation this summer with Kirill Kaprizov of the Minnesota Wild that there was possible trouble there for Kirill the Thrill. And also, you know that there was going to be questions regarding Spencer Knight and talking about competing every day, that not to be complacent. And it's just, and we talk about goalies kind of like quarterbacks in the NFL. Really, there's only one that can play. You can only play one quarterback. You can only play one goalie, unless there's a very unique situation. But most cases, one goalie playing at a time for this team. Of course, you have to have a solid backup because goalies aren't, especially in this day in the NHL, are not going to play full 82 games. And really talking about competing. And really my translation of that when I heard Sergei Bobrovsky say that was really not to be complacent about just thinking and assuming that this is his job just because he's getting $10 million a year. And hey, he responded well last season with a 267 GAA and his save percentage in the 910s for the Florida Panthers. So great bounce back season for Bobrovsky, and of course, this is the halfway point of his big 7-year, $70 million deal. So it's great that Sergei Bobrovsky was able to bounce back and all. So great for him. I did one thing that I did ask Sergei Bobrovsky was, we saw a lot of turnover with this Florida Panthers team on the forward groups. Of course, Mackenzie Weegar and Jonathan Huberdeau no longer being with the organization, and of course, a new coach, a few new assistant coaches. But one of the constants that remained for the Florida Panthers was goaltending coach Robert Tallis, who's been with the organization since 2009. I had an opportunity to ask Sergei Bobrovsky about what Rob Tallis means to him, that of him coming back to the Panthers organization.
Yeah, he's definitely been a great part of my development. He's been very supportive. We had with him ups and downs, and so we went through lots of things with him, and I'm happy to see him back, and I'm looking forward to build and keep developing myself.
And something that has been praised from the Florida Panthers about the Florida Panthers is what they've been doing with their goaltending excellence department, with Roberto Luongo leading the way, Robert Tallis, of course, Bill Zito, of course, being a part of it as well, and of course, Luongo's brother Leo being in the AHL side of things with the Charlotte Checkers as well, along with Jared Stahl, brother of Mark and Eric and Jordan, which we'll get to Marc Staal a little bit later. But so that in itself, the consistency, the improvement in the net. Of course, Spencer Knight struggled last year, but really took a step in the right direction towards the end of the season. And I think that was really noteworthy to ask Sergei Bobrovsky when it comes to how much of a difference Robert Tallis can make in helping him get to the best of his abilities as a goaltender. Of course, we know that Sergei Bobrovsky is not going to be Vezina Bob. If is it great if we do happen to see that? Absolutely. But still, to play at a high level is what we're hoping. And of course, Bob turned 34 just the other day, so he's not getting any younger. So the help of Robert Tallis and him being back is super crucial for this Florida Panthers team. So great to see, and great that Sergei Bobrovsky is happy himself to see that someone like Rob Tallis is coming back into the mix. In segment number 2, we are going to continue discussing what the players have said in media day yesterday at the Panthers ice den in Coral Springs. But first, we're going to tell you all about BetOnline. And betonline.net is your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this week's Week 3 games. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use a mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Second segment here on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And we're continuing the conversation of media day. So the third person to speak to the media on Wednesday was Captain Aleksander Barkov, who, when he walked into the room, you noticed immediately, number one, a different type of Florida hat that he had. He spoke about how he had to get a little bit of a cleaner one versus what he had previously, and Aleksander Barkov looked bulkier than what he did. So that is a very encouraging sign for you, Panther fans. And was asked about how him looking bulkier, and then his funny response was talking about that he hopes it's not the restaurant. So pretty funny response. Got a little bit of a laugh in the room. Also was asked about the adjustment period with all the changes of the roster of having so much success, and how the guys have been here for the last 2 weeks, and was asked about the playoff loss. And of course, the continuing theme is about what's in the past is in the past, and that the team is looking forward. And he said, he was honest, it took him a little bit of a while to get over the playoff loss against the Tampa Bay Lightning. Of course, it's a little different when you not only get swept, but you felt like that you could have at least had 2 of those 4 games in games 2 and 4, with those games being as close as they are, that maybe could have switched the series for the Panthers. But of course, Barkov is not worried about that anymore. For him, it's time to move on, and talked about how they're continuing the conversation about there being a target on the back of the Panthers, and it's like they're still not where they want to be. They sure, President's Trophy, but not where they want to be. Asked about how he found out about the Matthew Tkachuk trade for the Panthers, and really he found out around 8 a.m. Finish time. He was talking about how he was flooded with text messages, and it won't be the same without, but that he's over it. And I didn't take that in a bad way. A lot of people, when at least reading it on Twitter, saying that when the Aleksander Barkov said that he's over, is that it's like, forget Huberto and all that. He said, no, that's not the impression that I got from Aleksander Barkov. These are guys that are still friends off the ice. Of course, they won't be messaging probably often in the season. I mean, I can't necessarily confirm that, but they're still going to be friends. They spent 9 years in the organization together. I mean, so it's a big loss for someone personally like Barkov, but of course, the goal is just to know that this is a business at the end of the day, and that right now, what the Panthers have right here, right now, is the focus for this team, and continuing to reflect that around the rest of the locker room. That is Sasha Barkov's goal, at least from what he said to us today. And spoke about Matthew Tkachuk and spending some time with him, and talked about really how much of a caring individual Matthew Tkachuk is. He says hi to the equipment staff, make sure they're okay. Very talkative as well. Something we kind of knew already, but now that we kind of see, like, Matthew Tkachuk wanting to get to know everybody, even when the cameras are off. That's really encouraging to see. Of course, you see just Matthew Tkachuk walking around just always with a smile on his face. So great to see that it's even confirmed behind the scenes, at least a little bit that they do share with us. And also spoke about the welcoming message for Matthew Tkachuk, and Barkov texting him first, saying "Welcome to the team," and then it's weird to even hear Barkov bleep out a slur, saying that Matthew Tkachuk replied, "Effing right." So another laugh in the room. There was plenty of laughs today inside that press conference, in the conference room for during media day. So lots of laugh, and that was one of the many that Sasha Barkov was able to share with us about Matthew Tkachuk being welcomed to the team, and also spoke about about the adversity that the team didn't really find in the regular season, but also is made a lot of people well aware that you really can't you try not to get into a hole early and not worry about November and December. What like I said, similar to Sergei Bobrovsky's answer as well. So, and also a recurrent thing was 3 coaches in the last year for the Panthers as well. Of course, Joel Quenneville having to resign with everything that happened in Chicago, Andrew Burnett holding the fort for the Panthers, and of course not being uh re-signed for this team after President's Trophy and being swept out of out of the second round. So, there's a system change for the Panthers as well. There's gonna be a little bit of getting to know between the captain and the coach, and of course we'll get to Paul Maurice a little bit later, which like I was talking with Jacob yesterday on yesterday's show. If you haven't listened to that, please go back and listen to it. But Paul Maurice is one of my favorite to listen to today at media day. But one thing that is a little different, most importantly, is the fact that Jonathan Huberdeau was the longest tenured Panther on the squad right before being traded. So, and of course, his play on the ice backed him up as a leader for this team. But now that he's gone, and of course Matthew Tkachuk coming in and having an A on his sweater, I was able to ask Sasha Barkov about how he feels about the different leadership factors for a new guy coming in versus the guy who was there for so long. So here's Aleksander Barkov's answer. Huberdeau being the longest tenured Panther right before the trade. Of course, that with having tenure brings a lot of leadership into the locker room. Of course, the play on the ice as well. But Matthew Tkachuk bringing that leadership factor and having an A on his sweater in Calgary, how much does that change with the new guy coming into the mix?
Yeah, of course. It's going to change. It's a different guy, different type of player, different character. So it will change, and I'm sure it will be everything will be good. Knowing Matty, he's a great leader. He's been doing that for Calgary for a while, and you see how he plays the game. Like, I've seen his interviews, and I see like how he wants to be better, how he wants to win, and like, I've been around him for the past 2 weeks, so I'm really excited about him and our team, and yeah, just overall, like, really excited about this whole thing and getting started.
And bringing a different personality in the locker room is definitely going to be a little bit of an adjustment period for this Cats team. And of course, they talk about the getting along off the ice is really going to help eventually how they get on the ice. And of course, we speak about each player's habits and each player's what makes them tick, like we talked about earlier. And one person who was in the similar position of Matthew Tkachuk this year, coming into a new team after being in of course, with Matthew Tkachuk being a early first round pick and going into a new situation. Another player who was able to kind of speak about Matthew Tkachuk coming in and relating to what he did last year was someone like Sam Reinhart. Sam Reinhart also spoke about being the new guy in town. It took him a little while that to get acclimated to the culture, the city, of being around the organization. Sam Reinhart spoke about how he's less nervous this time around after October, because we spoke about a lot on the show, even during the 2021-22 season, about how Sam Reinhart struggled a little bit, and of course, and really turned it on, really starting in November and took off. Really was at a point per game pace for most of the second half of the season. So, and of course, playing on that third line, being shuffled, and all that stuff. Spoke a little bit about that, but also spoke about how his relationship with Paul Maurice and getting to know him. And they do have a previous relationship in the past with Hockey Canada, even though it was just an exhibition game for Sam Reinhart over there, but kind of got to know him a little bit. So that is kind of a plus for this Florida Panthers team on how about knowing him and getting to talk to him in the past, and now being his head coach. So there's a little bit of familiarity there between Sam Reinhart and Paul Maurice. And was asked about not running it back with the same group, and he's like, and with the and also with the three coaches in a matter of a year. And he talked about how structure is important, and thankful to have Paul Maurice in the building, because think about that answer, structure in the building for the Panthers. And yeah, people pick on Paul Maurice for missing the playoffs a lot during his time as a coach. But of course, those 20 years of him coaching shows a trust factor in different GMs throughout his time coaching, and the structure there had to have been a structure throughout those 20 years of coaching. And you don't get to that. You don't get to 20 plus years of coaching without having a structure. And of course, that's the difference between someone like Paul Maurice being in the mix versus just a guy learning on the job. Even though Andrew Brunette had 70 plus games to learn still, but this is a team that has higher aspirations than just getting to the second round. And it felt that, of course, Bill Zito felt like that just what wasn't good enough and all. So one thing we've been discussing all offseason is the right wing forward position for the Panthers. And of course, this was an issue for the Panthers last year. Who was going to be playing on the top line with either Aleksander Barkov, or on the second line with Sam Bennett last year? And of course, Maxim Mammon had a little bit of time there as well, but wasn't really going to be the guy long term for the Panthers there. Of course, they make the trade for Claude Giroux. And Anthony Duclair is really on that top line and some parts in the second line. But Anthony Duclair is going to, like we spoke about, is going to be missing some time for the Panthers, likely 25% of the season to at least 50% of the season. So I had an opportunity to ask Sam Reinhart what he thinks of the shock of Anthony Duclair getting hurt during the offseason, and how he is going to step up along with other players in the lineup for this Florida Panthers team. So here's Sam Reinhart's response to that.
It's never an easy thing to see, especially something so freak like that. I think it provides a lot of guys different opportunities to step up. And I think the off ice part of it, I think he's someone, his personality, I'm sure a little bit. He's someone that's not going to miss a beat. He's going to still be around the guys, and I think that's an important thing for him going through the start of the year. Especially with some of the new guys, like you guys have pointed out. So, hopefully it all works out in the end, and he gets back to playing soon.
And that's a position that we're going to be discussing quite a bit throughout the season, especially in the beginning, because it's going to be a little bit of a hole to fill for this Florida Panthers team, as they try to kind of stay afloat while Anthony Duclair is gone from this team, at least, like I said, for the first 25 to 50% of the season. And of course, there has to be skating for Anthony Duclair as well, and in order to get from just skating on his own to putting the pads on, and in order to also get up to game speed, because game speed is of course so much different than practice, and of course trying to get back in to the mix. But the best quote that Sam Reinhart had, that kind of started like a ripple effect of asking different guys, what Aaron Ekblad earlier was talking about, how Matthew Tkachuk is a guy who pisses you off. And Sam Reinhart's response to that was he pisses his opponents off because he's good. And of course, Matthew Tkachuk being a guy who is always right in front of the net, even when he gets up to the low slot, and of course when the whistle blows, of course opponents aren't going to like that he gets up close. And of course, the rule in hockey is don't touch the goalie. Even if he doesn't touch the goalie, opponents aren't going to like that he's going to get close. So it's going to talk. It's every time there's going to be, not every time, but when the whistle does blow, expect a lot of Matthew Tkachuk being involved in those, and that's kind of the grittiness that we speak about, really, with Matthew Tkachuk being in the mix, and that's kind of a different factor when this Florida Panthers team was looking for. Aleksander Barkov said that he's the guy that we are looking for as talking about Matthew Tkachuk being in the mix for the Panthers. Another player that also spoke to me that I was looking forward to listening to, that we spoke about yesterday, was Marc Staal, veteran defenseman Marc Staal. Of course, having a Stanley Cup appearance with the New York Rangers, being a first-round pick in 2005, spent a few years in Detroit. So it's been a different direction in Marc Staal's career over the last few seasons, and asked about what he can add, and he talked about continuing to play hard, defend his own end, and teach the young guys, because he's one of the oldest guys on this team. Him along with Radko Gudas, of course, both of them going to be expiring contracts this year, coach. So what kind of impact can those guys and their mentorship can do for some of the young guys? We've talked about a little bit about Lucas Carlson into the mix as well. So we discussed a little bit about that as well. So also with Marc Staal, uh, we we spoke about he spoke about Eric Stahl, who's on a PTO, that he's going to be living with him a little bit throughout the training camp for the Panthers. And Jacob and I spoke about what are the chances that Eric Stahl gets to make the lineup for the Panthers, and also talked about number one defenseman Aaron Ekblad, and talked about how he loves his confidence and how he carries himself, and also was like we mentioned earlier, Jared Stahl being a part of the Charlotte Checkers coaching staff, Marc Staal being part of the mix, and they were asked, "What about Jordan?" And Marc Staal joked around saying that he's not involved; he's a Hurricane. So one of the many other laughs that in the room for this Panthers media day. But I got an opportunity to ask Marc Staal about being in a different situation, with being in a Stanley Cup final, mentoring a guy like Moritz Seider in Detroit, and how much different this is for Marc Staal coming into this situation with the Florida Panthers, being after them winning a President's Trophy. So here is Marc Staal's answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, there's turnover on every team, and these guys had a lot of success last year, and there has been some turnover, but I think there's a lot of players returning in that room that are hungry to get back after it. And so, for me, I just want to jump in and get involved with those guys as much as I can early, and start pushing this thing in the right direction from the start. It's a long grind. It's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and it's just about like everyone says, you just take it the next day and keep building towards the ultimate goal, which is Stanley Cup. So today's day one, and we're excited to get started.
And that response just pretty much tells me that he's been here before. And this isn't the first time that he's coming off a season where the team that, even though he wasn't on the Panthers last year, that he's coming into a situation where that team that he's playing for specifically won the President's Trophy the year prior. He spoke about earlier about how the New York Rangers won the President's Trophy, and then and the expectations that come the year after, even though he did not win the Stanley Cup with the New York Rangers as well. So kind of spoke about how similar the situations are for him and this Florida Panthers team, being that he has been there before, and of course going into a new situation, a different situation in Detroit, who's an up and coming team as well. So that great stuff from Marc Staal from Media Day. But we saved the best two for last, which we will be discussing Matthew Tkachuk and Coach Paul Maurice in the third and final segment here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. So stick with us.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast on this Thursday, September 22nd edition of the show, talking about Media Day. And Matthew Tkachuk was the final player to talk at Media Day, and of course, probably by design. Of course, the players hyping him up, and then Matthew Tkachuk kind of being told about what the players have said about him. So, asked about the comment about pissing people off, and he responded, "Is like, yeah, maybe that's why that people brought him here." So, talked about. He's well aware of that's what people think about him. And of course, I can only imagine the praise that Matthew Tkachuk had in just a phone conversation with Bill Zito prior to the trade and discussing the contract, even though the contract was discussed with Calgary prior to the trade, but kind of like the sense of being wanted. And that's kind of really what Matthew Tkachuk, that has really helped his confidence. Not that he needs any help being confident as well. And talks about how Florida is like a top destination in the NHL. Talk about the lifestyle already. And right before recording this, Jameson Olive of FloridaPanthers.com shared an image of Matthew Tkachuk on his Instagram story about going straight from Media Day to the beach. So kind of already liking the style and kind of getting some enjoying his time here right before training camp starts tomorrow. So happy for Matthew Tkachuk that he's enjoying himself while he's here. And one thing that just really interested in that I wanted to ask Matthew Tkachuk is that in the 2021 season, when we had these pods of divisions, of course, Canada specifically had their own division. Of course, a lot of them had to do with COVID restrictions as well, of why all the Canadian teams got their own division. But Matthew Tkachuk and Brady Tkachuk were in the same division and played each other eight plus times a year. Some other teams you played 10 times a year. So there's a different level when you're playing each other so many times. And now Matthew Tkachuk and Brady Tkachuk get to do the same thing in the same division in a real season for at least the next 8 years. So I had an opportunity to ask Matthew Tkachuk I asked him, how much will you be communicating with Brady Tkachuk during the season now that you're in the same division? This is Matthew Tkachuk's answer.
He's my brother, obviously. I think that, I'll do the same thing that I always do, but these games just obviously mean a lot more. They're all 4-point games. I think that when we played in Calgary and in Ottawa, when I was with the Flames, it was, it was more like fun, like kind of just playing against your brother. Like now this is business. Obviously I'm his biggest fan. He's my biggest fan. We wish each other both obviously tons of personal success, but we're playing against each other. Like I want to beat them probably just as much as he wants to beat us. We're both competitive guys, and they're going to do everything in our power to get our teams to playoffs, have success, especially against each other. They're rivalry games now.
And personally, I asked Matthew Tkachuk that question because, of course, I am the youngest of two in my family, and I have an older brother as well. And of course, competing against my brother in sports, there's a little bit of a different level of you are their biggest cheerleader, but when you play against them, that you just want to beat the crap out of them in the sport that you play. And personally, that is why I decided to ask Matthew Tkachuk that question. So I remember just seeing a few clips of Matthew Tkachuk falling on the ice and Brady skating away, and then just as he's on the floor on the ice on his back, he goes and checks Brady from behind. So take a look whenever these teams do play about kind of the off the puck stuff about what Brady and Matthew are going to do to kind of agitate each other. And So that is something that I will definitely be looking for. And also talked about changing the culture, being the new guy in the building versus Jonathan Huberdeau being out, and talked about that it could be a little difficult with trying to change the culture being in. But all he's talked about really about being himself throughout this whole thing, and also spoke about expectations for the Florida Panthers coming into the season about a second round exit and the pressure that comes with it. And one thing that Matthew Tkachuk, which was being honest about, which is very valid about, he played in a Canadian market, so he knows what that pressure is like, so that he's used to that. And of course, with him being here in South Florida, not a lot of national coverage, but still a little bit of pressure. It doesn't mean that there's insurmountable pressure for this Florida Panthers team, but that Matthew Tkachuk is just used to it, and that it's not gonna really affect him about what he's gonna do when he comes to the ice every single day. And of course, really says only he only cares about the expectations in the room. Also, asked about Aleksander Barkov and speaks about that he hasn't seen skill like Aleksander Barkov's in his whole life. And we're talking about a guy who was just playing on possibly the best line in the NHL with Elias Lindholm and Johnny Gaudreau just last season. And he's saying how Aleksander Barkov is, he hasn't seen a skill like that. It's just really, it just really speaks the volumes to the type of player Aleksander Barkov is. Of course, won the Selke Trophy in 2021, so it speaks volumes to the kind of reputation that Aleksander Barkov has. So credit to Barkov and what he's been able to do as being the culture setter for this team. And also, we've been talking about where Matthew Tkachuk could be slotted in this lineup. Some people might think that he's going to be on the type line with Barkov, maybe on the second line with Bennett, who Bennett had a lot of chemistry with Jonathan Huberdeau. But Matthew Tkachuk spoke about how he doesn't care who he's paired out, who he's playing with, and spoke about the grit that the team needs, and says that fans will love the way he plays. And just seeing the highlight videos of Matthew Tkachuk, I can only imagine once the games do start and the puck does drop. Next one, which was probably the best of all of them, was just the constant joking that Paul Maurice was doing during his press conference. It's crazy because South Florida has two head coaches, new head coaches too, who are constantly joking with the media and just very upbeat people. Of course, the other coach being Mike McDaniel of the Miami Dolphins. Kind of like with some legendary responses, and looks like that we're going to see a lot of that with Paul Maurice. So Paul Maurice is going to be a really exciting guy to cover throughout his time with the Florida Panthers. Of course, it's going to be a different feel and a different mood when the team loses. But of course, this is a fresh start. Everyone's 0-0-0. So of course, you're going to see this upbeat Paul Maurice right now. But don't expect it all the time. But of course, I'm not gonna crap on Paul Maurice if the team loses and we don't see that kind of friendly banter between Paul Maurice and some of the media members. So just trying to set an expectation for all of you guys. So kind of starts off with a joke. It's like, tough crowd, like let her rip, just right there, and kind of talked about how hectic it can be to move, about settling down, about meeting with hundreds of different people, and also spoke about children as well. Spoke about how one of his children are in Coral Gables going to the University of Miami, the other one's in Estero, and talked about how they're all out of the house. And then he gives a thumbs up with a smile, and then that left a laugh in the room. So every parent's dream for their kids to move out of their house. So spoke about the continuing theme about Matthew Tkachuk pissing people off with his play, and Maurice was said that I would have thought pain in the ass for Matthew Tkachuk. So, kind of, kind of toying around and just trying to also compliment his player as well, and talk about what he brings to the table, and talked about compared Matthew Tkachuk him coming to the team is having different ingredients about hockey teams championship caliber hockey teams having different ingredients, saying that not everybody needs to be like a Matthew Tkachuk. We speak about his grit. We speak about how he's getting right in front of your faces. We talk about the after the whistle stuff for Matthew Tkachuk, and that not everybody has to be that way. Is that for everybody to just be themselves? And of course, Matthew Tkachuk spoke about how he's always involved in the play, not afraid to get in front of the net, and a lot of fire to his game. And he doesn't want any other player to change their game just because Matthew Tkachuk is playing like he does and all. So one question that I asked Paul Maurice was that with the trade of Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar, this team, by their average age, got younger. And I asked Paul Maurice about what he's looking forward to with some players being in their prime and some of the younger guys who are trying to be mainstays on the NHL roster. Here's what Paul Maurice had to say about that.
They got it's this great mix now, right? So a lot of your drivers are coming right into their prime. They're not necessarily 33 and they're just starting to come in. The Barkov, even Aaron Ekblad, it feels like he's been in the league as long as I have. And he's still a young man, right? There's more there with those guys. And then you've got some kids. I think the mix is critical. One year, I think the year we had about 114 points in Winnipeg. I still think we had about the third youngest forward group. So that they still have some years before they're going to hit that prime. That most of the drivers here are in their prime, or just more exciting, they're just coming into their prime. They're just starting to get to that point where they've got experience. Their bodies are heavy enough now. When they train in the summer, they train harder. Their capacity grows so they can do more. Really excited about that.
And you guys should be excited about that too, for these players and an opportunity for them to continue to grow. As Paul Maurice said, they're getting to know who they personally are as people, and also spoke about about the getting 122 points last year, and talked about how the goal is to build a game that is sustainable past April. At about 122 last year was that bar about how this team hadn't gone through really much adversity last season, but didn't really say that in a bad way, because he said about they were just that good. But of course, when you don't face that much adversity throughout the season, then it's gonna be harder for teams to adjust that when the going does get tough in the postseason. And the trade for Kuchuk, he talked about how the players needing a different option. Talks about and also talks about how Kuchuk is that type of player who wins battles 3 feet from the boards. So he spoke about how that is something that the Florida Panthers are going to be working on really early on in training camp. So look out for that as we will be discussing that. And also talked about the decision why to come to the Florida Panthers, and spoke about how he was only going to take an opportunity that he said about how he would only go to a place that he personally can feel better as a head coach, in a better situation. Of course, relationship with management as well, ownership, about what the players are going to do when about buying into what Maurice is trying to sell as well, about because of course, yeah, sure, in the pros, players are getting paid a whole bunch of money, so you can't really control about what they do off the ice and all that, but continuing to be a good example, and spoke about how he called players multiple times throughout the offseason. So that's already telling me that Paul Maurice is a player's coach and a guy who's trying to get to know them in order to build something that's more sustainable. It's talked about not just the goal isn't to just be a second round exit anymore for this team, and that getting to know your players is really kind of the start for this team. But the most important quote for that Paul Maurice said on Wednesday morning / afternoon was, of course, spoke about, he was asked by Tim Reynolds about Andrew Burnett checking in with Sergei Bobrovsky about the everything that's going on in Russia. But one thing that Paul Maurice was asked about what he is going to say to Sergei Bobrovsky, uh, when talking about that situation. Even though I didn't ask this question, I wanted to play the clip for you guys on this, on just to, because just the response for Paul Maurice is just something that I really like, and I want to discuss more about it. So here's the Paul Maurice on talking about uh everything that's going on in Russia.
Season, the war in Ukraine started in February, and Andrew spoke often about how he had to check in on Bob quite a bit. Just where's your head at? Where's your head at? There's no Cliff's notes for how to coach a player when dealing with real world stuff 5,000 miles away. Have you gotten? What's your relationship with Bob? How do you have you learned to read him?
Our relationship really is just starting one meeting, hockey related, family related. I think what's important is that they all feel the support, but an actual structure to that support. So certainly, and Robbie Tallis does a marvelous job developing relationships with goalies. So that's the first support structure for him. Coaching, then management. And then this is true of whatever a player would be dealing with off the ice, that there is a structure there. If he needs help, he can get help. Professional people to talk to. I think if there is, I'm going to be careful how I say it and be careful how you guys write this, please. Take care of me on this one. If there's a silver lining in COVID and people lost their lives, so I want you to be careful, and I'm trying to be careful with it, is that we started to really look at mental health. And I would say just personally for me, I did, where you start to wonder what a player is going through more. 25 years ago when you came in, nobody ever talked about that stuff. You didn't want to talk about that. Now that is forefront in what we do, and we do have a structure of people here to help with that. So anything that a player is going through or a staff member, we do have support, but we also have a structure to that support.
And that's what setting culture is all about. Being there for your players and making sure you're talking about the important things, which your mind is your number one asset, because of course when you break a bone in your arm or your leg, you can see a broken bone. But when it comes to like your mental health and all that, nobody can actually physically see it. You can talk about it all you want, but nobody actually gets to see what a person is going through emotionally. And that's what Paul Maurice is hoping to get out of Sergei Bobrovsky. And of course, he resigned from his position with the Winnipeg Jets back in January, right before Dave Lowry was named interim head coach for the Winnipeg Jets. And just a very response that kind of made me exhale a little bit about when talking about it. The fact that the head coach is talking about mental health openly, and of course him taking his break. I did not get the opportunity to ask Paul Maurice about how he personally has really how his mental health has helped with taking that break from coaching. But I'm sure he would have. I can't really speak for him, but I would like to hear like kind of like his mindset about taking that break as well. But the fact that he wants to be there for his goaltender, and of course continuing the conversation about something that has been going on, especially now with the last few years with COVID being a thing in our society. It's not only a pandemic that's spreading, but it's a mental health crisis that our society is going through as well. So Paul Maurice, I'm going to take care of you on that response as far as talking about mental health. And that is really was probably the greatest answer of everything when it comes to everything with media day. And Braden Hachey, 7th round pick for the Florida Panthers from last year's draft, spoke about his mental health as well, about everything that he's gone through. Had an exclusive interview with Doug Plagans. The NHL does the special Bell Let's Talk thing on Twitter that about talking about your mental health, and hopefully that we get to end the stigma when talking about mental health, that it's okay to be talking about your feelings out loud and everything that you're going through, because you guys come here and listen to this podcast to get away from everything that you go through in your life. But just know that there are things that do happen in your actual life that of course we all find different distractions in order to kind of soothe our minds and of course, me, myself, of course, there are things outside of this podcast that, we're all fighting some type of battles. And that's kind of really the biggest takeaway that I am getting from all this. So I honestly, I really appreciate that response from Paul Maurice. And I hope that we can get more of this kind of discussion from the head coach. And that is really, really, in my opinion, true leadership for this Florida Panthers team. And that culture was the big talk. And really that, in my opinion, just hearing that response is a really big culture setter for this Panthers team. But this was a fun episode of Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. We went a little long on this episode, but of course, including clips and also talking about my perspective on the media day for the Panthers. A lot of players spoke, including head coach Paul Maurice, of course. But the fun is just beginning for this Panthers team. Right before they hit the ice on Thursday, their first practice for training camp will be Thursday at September 22nd at 9 a.m. at the Panthers Ice Den. It'll be split practices, one at 9 a.m., one at 12 p.m. Unfortunately, they are closed to the public, but you can follow this podcast as well, where I will be covering. I'll be in person for day one of training camp before I head back to Orlando, but also to follow all the people who are going to be consistently there for this Panthers team and have a little bit of a pulse of what's going on about all the battles that are going on for this Florida Panthers team ahead of training camp. Thank you so much, guys, for listening to this, and I hope that you really enjoyed this episode of Locked On Florida Panthers. So come back tomorrow, and we'll have some more on everything in regards to training camp. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast so you'll be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steele Roden, where they'll be covering all the preseason activities around the National Hockey League. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for your second listen of the day, make sure to listen to today's episode of Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Where's your team? Every day.